What if I told you that death isn't the end, that beyond the veil of our earthly existence, there's something so magnificent, so overwhelmingly beautiful, that those who've glimpsed it never see life the same way again? Today, I'm sharing a testimony that has moved millions, challenged skeptics, and transformed the way people view their own mortality. This isn't just another story. This is a window into eternity itself. We live our lives surrounded by questions we can't answer. What happens when we take our final breath? Is there really something beyond this physical world? For centuries, philosophers, theologians, and scientists have debated these mysteries. But what if the answer didn't come from theory or speculation, but from someone who actually experienced it? Someone who crossed over, witnessed heaven, and returned to tell us what awaits on the other side. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A successful surgeon, Dr. Michael Harrison, was driving home from the hospital when a semi-truck ran a red light. The collision was catastrophic. His car crumpled like paper. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but Dr. Harrison was already gone. No pulse, no breathing, clinically dead. His colleagues at the trauma center worked frantically for 18 minutes, performing CPR, administering medications, doing everything modern medicine could offer. And then, against all odds, his heart started beating again. But what Dr. Harrison experienced during those 18 minutes would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who heard his story. He didn't see darkness. He didn't experience nothingness. Instead, he found himself in a place more real than anything he'd ever known on earth. A place where love wasn't just a feeling, but the very atmosphere itself. Where light didn't just illuminate, it embraced. Where every question he'd ever had was answered without words. Like many near-death experiences, Dr. Harrison's journey began with a tunnel, but this wasn't the cliché we've heard about in movies. This was a passage filled with an indescribable warmth, a pulling sensation that felt like coming home after a lifetime of being away. The light at the end wasn't harsh or blinding. It was inviting, yet more brilliant than 1,000 suns. As he moved toward it, he felt every pain, every worry, every burden from his earthly life simply dissolve away. When he emerged from that tunnel, what he saw defied description. Imagine the most beautiful landscape you've ever witnessed. Now multiply that beauty by infinity, rolling meadows of colors that don't exist in our visible spectrum. Flowers that seemed to sing, trees that swayed with purpose and joy, mountains in the distance that radiated peace. And above it all, a sky filled with light that felt alive, conscious, welcoming. Dr. Harrison later said that calling it heaven felt inadequate. It was home, the place his soul had always belonged. As Dr. Harrison stood in awe of his surroundings, he became aware of a presence, not threatening, not distant, but intimately close. A being of pure light and love approached him. Without speaking a single word, this presence communicated directly to his soul. Dr. Harrison understood immediately that this being knew everything about him, every thought he'd ever had, every action, both good and bad, every secret fear and hidden dream. Yet instead of judgment, there was only compassion. Instead of condemnation, there was complete acceptance. This presence showed him something that shook him to his core, a panoramic review of his entire life. But it wasn't just his perspective. He felt every emotion he'd ever caused in others. When he'd comforted a grieving family after a failed surgery, he felt their gratitude flood through him. When he'd spoken harshly to a nurse in frustration, he felt her hurt as if it were his own. Every act of kindness multiplied into waves of joy. Every moment of selfishness created ripples of pain. He realized that heaven wasn't about being perfect. It was about how we loved, how we treated others, how we grew and learned and chose compassion over indifference. Then something extraordinary happened. Dr. Harrison's grandfather appeared. The man who had raised him after his parents died, who had passed away 15 years earlier. But this wasn't the frail elderly man he remembered from the nursing home. This was his grandfather in the prime of life, radiant, whole, more alive than ever. They embraced. And in that embrace, Dr. Harrison felt decades of grief and loss transform into pure joy. His grandfather told him, without words, that death is merely a transition, that love never ends, that everyone we've lost is simply waiting for us in a place where separation is impossible. Other figures began to appear, a childhood friend who had died in a car accident, a patient he'd lost on the operating table, now healthy and grateful for his efforts. Even people he didn't recognize at first, relatives from generations past who had been watching over him his entire life. They celebrated his arrival like a hero returning from war. They showed him that his life, with all its struggles and imperfections, had mattered more than he ever knew. Every small act of kindness had created eternal ripples. Every moment of love had built something permanent in this realm beyond time. As Dr. Harrison absorbed the overwhelming beauty and love surrounding him, the presence of light communicated something difficult. It wasn't his time yet. He had a choice to make. He could stay in this paradise, surrounded by peace and reunion, or he could return to his broken body, to a life filled with pain, struggle, and uncertainty. But if he returned, he would carry a message, a testimony that would help others understand that death is not the end, that how we live matters, that love is the only thing we take with us. The decision wasn't easy. Who would choose to leave paradise? But Dr. Harrison thought of his wife, his children who still needed him. He thought of the patients he could still help, the lives he could still touch. And he thought of this message, this glimpse of eternity that could transform how people live their daily lives. With a heavy heart but clear purpose, he chose to return. The moment he made that choice, he felt himself being pulled back through the tunnel, away from the light, back into the confines of his physical body. When Dr. Harrison's eyes opened in the trauma bay, surrounded by exhausted medical staff, everything looked different. The hospital room, which he'd worked in for 20 years, now seemed grey and limited. Colours were duller, sounds were harsher. His body ached in ways he'd never experienced. But he was alive, and he carried something precious, the memory of where he'd been and what he'd learned. His colleagues were amazed by his recovery. Medically speaking, he shouldn't have survived, and certainly not without brain damage after 18 minutes without oxygen. But Dr. Harrison was different. Not damaged, but transformed. He approached his work with new compassion. He held the hands of dying patients and whispered to them not to be afraid, that something beautiful awaited them. He reconciled with family members he'd been distant from, understanding now that relationships are the only currency that matters in eternity. He began sharing his testimony, first hesitantly, then more boldly as he saw how it impacted others. People who were suicidal found hope. Those grieving found comfort. Skeptics found themselves questioning their assumptions about reality itself. What made Dr. Harrison's testimony particularly compelling wasn't just the emotional impact, but the verifiable details he provided. During his near-death experience, while his body lay lifeless on the gurney, he accurately described events happening in other parts of the hospital. He mentioned a red shoe on the third-floor ledge outside a window, something no one would have noticed. When staff checked, the shoe was exactly where he said, in a location impossible to see from his position. He described conversations between doctors in the waiting room, repeating their exact words. He knew about a nurse's personal tragedy that she had told no one at work. These weren't vague spiritual impressions. They were specific, verifiable facts that couldn't be explained by hallucination, oxygen deprivation, or brain chemistry. Skeptics tried to dismiss his experience, but they couldn't explain how a clinically dead man could have known things happening outside his line of sight. In rooms he'd never been to, involving people he'd never met. The evidence suggested that consciousness doesn't depend on brain activity, that we are more than our physical bodies, that the soul is real and it continues beyond death. Dr. Harrison's testimony carries a message that transcends religion, culture, and personal belief systems. It's simply this: how we live matters. The love we share, the kindness we extend, the forgiveness we offer, these aren't just nice ideas. They're the building blocks of our eternal existence. Every interaction is an opportunity to create something that lasts forever. Every moment of choosing compassion over anger, generosity over selfishness, understanding over judgment, these choices ripple into eternity. Heaven isn't just a destination, it's a quality of existence built on the foundation of love, and we can experience glimpses of it here, now, in this life, when we choose to live aligned with eternal values. The fear of death loses its power when we understand it's merely a doorway. The anxiety about not having enough time fades when we realize that love transcends time itself. The grief of losing someone becomes bearable when we know with certainty that we'll see them again in a place where separation is impossible. So, what do we do with a testimony like this? We could dismiss it as wishful thinking, hallucination, or religious fantasy. Or we could allow it to transform how we live today. Imagine waking up tomorrow knowing with absolute certainty that your life has eternal significance. That the kind word you speak to a stranger creates ripples in eternity. That the time you spend with loved ones builds something permanent in a realm beyond time. That forgiveness isn't just healthy psychology, it's cosmic reality. That love isn't just an emotion, it's the fundamental force of the universe. Dr. Harrison often says that his near-death experience wasn't just about what he saw in heaven. It was about how heaven changed earth for him. He no longer fears death, which means he's truly free to live. He no longer hoards possessions, knowing they're temporary. He no longer holds grudges, understanding that love is the only thing that matters. He approaches each day as a gift, each person as eternal, each moment as sacred, and he invites all of us to live the same way, not because we've had a near-death experience, but because his testimony gives us permission to believe that this life is preparation for something infinitely more beautiful. The testimony of Dr. Michael Harrison is just one of thousands of near-death experiences reported around the world. But each one carries the same essential message. We are more than these physical bodies. Death is not the end. Love is eternal. How we live matters not just for 70 or 80 years, but for eternity itself. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between. This testimony invites you to consider the possibility that there is more to existence than what we can touch, measure, or explain. What if heaven is real? What if your life has eternal significance? What if everyone you meet is a soul on a journey toward eternity? How would that change the way you live today? The choice, as it was for Dr. Harrison, is yours. Will you live like this life is all there is? Or will you live like someone who knows that love, kindness, and compassion are building something permanent in a realm beyond time? The glimpse of heaven Dr. Harrison experienced isn't just his story. It's an invitation to all of us to live differently, love deeper, and embrace the eternal nature of our existence. If this testimony moved you, if it challenged your thinking or gave you hope, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something that made you question the nature of reality? Have you lost someone and wondered where they are now? This community is a safe space to explore these profound questions together. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We're exploring the deepest questions of human existence, one testimony at a time. Because understanding where we're going changes everything about how we live today. Thank you for watching, and may you carry this glimpse of heaven with you into every moment of your life.